Thanks, Ron. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to those people who are watching online. Trust that you are able to see well enough and that you are able to hear. I was thinking as I was getting ready to do this message this morning that it's only 2 weeks since Easter Sunday. And here we are looking at this passage. And so I thought it might be a good idea for us to just, at the beginning of this, to just have a look at the number of times that Jesus appeared to his disciples. Firstly, he appeared to Mary at the tomb early in the morning, and John records this. John is the only one who records this. Then he appeared to 2 disciples walking the road to Emmaus. It was still during that first day, the day of his resurrection. He appeared to these 2 disciples as they were walking on their way to Emmaus. They were completely nonplussed, didn't know what was going on, and they, as Jesus met them, you remember that they said to him, haven't you heard about what's been going on these last few days? And then he explained the whole story to them. And when they arrived at the place where they were going at Emmaus, they sat down together to eat, and Jesus broke the bread and handed it to them, and suddenly their eyes were opened, and they realised who it was who had been walking with them on the road. And so they turned around straight away, and it must have been dark by this time, and the Jews didn't travel in darkness, not at the end of the day, and so they turned around straight away and went back to Jerusalem, to where the other disciples were. And that was the next time that Jesus appeared to the disciples. At the house where they were still hiding, they were still in Jerusalem at this stage, at the house where they were hiding in the evening of the 3rd day, Thomas was absent on this occasion, and Jesus appeared to them, and particularly to Peter at that time. A week later, they were at the same house, still there, and this time Thomas was present, and Nola spoke about this last week. This time Thomas was present, and he suddenly became aware of who his Lord really was. Thomas, as Nola pointed out to us last week, commonly known as Thomas the Doubter, Doubting Thomas. And I think at some time all of us have been doubting Thomases. I trust that none of us are doubting Thomases today. And then about 40 days later, and that's the story that we are looking at today, about 40 days later, Jesus appeared to them at Galilee on the seashore. And it's probably only a few days before he ascended into heaven. That time is not recorded for us. When I was thinking about this, and when I was rostering those who would preach on this day, I titled this sermon Breakfast in Galilee, because that is what happened. They had breakfast in Galilee. When we look at this chapter and see it in its context, and especially when we see look at the chapter before, it seems like an afterthought. It seems as though it was added later, because the last words of chapter 20 are these: Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Now that, to many people, reads like the concluding words of the Gospel of John. But there is another chapter, chapter 21. And that has confused different authors as to why there would be an addendum. Was it added by someone else? But the common feeling is that no, it was genuinely written by John. And I believe it's a vital link in the ongoing story of the spreading of the gospel. Without it, we would be left wondering how the disciple Simon Peter became the Apostle Peter, whose place in the Acts of the Apostles was of such significance. So important. Without this story, we would not know how Peter came to really, really love Jesus and know him as his Lord. We don't find anything in the Gospels about the actions of the disciples between the evening of Thomas's conversion, and I'll call it that, Thomas's conversion, and this event at the Sea of Galilee, except that the angel who met the women at the tomb instructed them to go to Galilee where Jesus would meet them. And we know that they didn't go straight to Galilee because the first couple of days, as I've already mentioned, they were still in Jerusalem. So sometime later they went to Galilee. And I guess there they were waiting to see what would happen next. During that time, it was something that I think seems quite normal. The disciples that were there, 7 of them altogether, of which Peter was probably the leader, decided that they needed to do something. They have to eat anyway. So they decided they would go out fishing. Remember, all of those 7 disciples were considered to be fishermen. The 2 that are not named are probably Nathaniel and, did I write it down? I don't think I did. It doesn't matter. Nathaniel and someone else, and it just won't come to me for the moment. And it's thought that they were all fishermen. So it was quite a normal thing to get in a boat and go out fishing, and especially if you're hungry and you want something to eat. And so off they went. It's a normal thing for fishing in that time to be done at night. I think it's recorded somewhere that a popular way of fishing in the Sea of Galilee was to go out in the boat and with a lantern, hold the lantern above the water and look down, and when you saw fish in the water, and the water must have been pretty clear, when you saw fish in the water you would throw the net over and catch them. If that was the method that they were using, then it wasn't very successful. For them it'd break the tension and it'd give them some purpose. Jesus had died. Their expectations of the life he was leading had crashed to the earth. They still didn't understand the significance of his resurrection. They were still trying to make sense out of this whole thing that had been going on in the last few weeks. It would be easy in their minds to turn back to what they knew best, which was to go fishing. Even though they had been told that from that time, some time on, they would be made fishers of men, I think they still didn't really understand what that meant. All night and no results. Been there, not all night, but fished a lot and no results. In the grey dawn, after a tiring and fruitless night, they had drawn near the shore. They were about 90 metres away, and they were hailed by a lone figure on the beach. The words might have been something like, "Friends, have you made a catch?" No? Then throw your net on the other side of the boat and you'll catch some. I remember a few weeks ago I was speaking here and I was preaching on the passage in Luke's Gospel about another fishing expedition, on which occasion Jesus was in the boat with them. And on that occasion, he told them to throw their net out for a catch, and Peter argued the point with Jesus. What's the point? They had come in from the previous night fishing and not caught anything. So it's pretty understandable that Peter might be thinking, what's the point? I fished all night last night. There can't be any fish where we are. But Jesus said, throw the net over. And reluctantly, they complied and they hauled in a huge catch of fish. And it was on that occasion that they were told that they would become fishers of men. This great catch of fish that we read about in this chapter 21 could symbolise the breadth of the mission that they would be starting on in the near future after Pentecost. It's interesting that it says there were 153 fish. And I read that Jerome said that at that time there were only 153 kinds of fish in the sea, implying that each of those 153 fishes were one of a kind. But of course, as Neil has already pointed out to us this morning, that's grossly underestimated. The sea contains a lot more fish than 153, or types of fish than 153. So I don't think we need to look at that number as having any specific significance. It was just a lot of fish in the net. A very successful night's fishing, or rather moments fishing, morning's fishing. Acting on their own strength, the disciples caught nothing. But when Jesus directed the task, a huge catch resulted. And I think that's the point of it. We should see the point of this for the work that this church, and for that matter any church. Jesus once told his team that it was only by prayer that demons would be cast out. Taking this passage as a message, we need to make prayer a high priority as we are seeking God's leading for our future. Very important. There are there are things that I've read in recent times that there is a failure of prayer, of there being enough prayer in churches throughout the world. It's not unique, and it's probably something that happens because of the way we've become so prosperous and so dependent on our own ability. Churches are not turning to prayer. So we have a clear message here of the importance of prayer. Thinking about the disciples out there in the boat, hearing Jesus call to them from the shore, suddenly John was quick to catch on. "It's the Lord," he said. And Peter straight away, and according to what I read again, the fishermen weren't very heavily clothed. They just perhaps something wrapped around their waist, a loincloth or something of the kind. Peter grabbed his coat, and it's written in Jewish law that you don't greet somebody else naked or undressed. So Peter quickly grabbed his coat, wrapped it around himself, and took off, no doubt swimming to the shore. He wouldn't have been in very good shape to meet somebody by the time he got there anyway. But nevertheless, that was what he did. And so they find Jesus there on the beach, waiting for them to arrive, with a fire of coals and fish and bread laid on it. When I thought of the term, the title, Breakfast in Galilee, I did that because a long time ago, while we were still in the process of building this building, we performed an American-written musical that was entitled Breakfast in Galilee. And our choir of that day sang that musical. And about here somewhere, we had a fire of coals, and I don't know that we had fish on it, but we might have had something that looked like it. There was no roof on this place at that time, so we were quite able to have a little fire on the platform. It's a concrete platform, so we weren't going to do any harm. I was going to look up the music for that, but I never got round to doing it. I've been busy doing other things. But you know, that musical described to us in very, very graphic terms just what it must have been like for the disciples that morning to see Jesus standing on the beach, with the fire already burning, the fish all ready to eat, breakfast in Galilee. It's a marvellous thought. There are strong indications that this scene is very significant to illustrate that Jesus' resurrection was more than a spiritual resurrection. A spirit being would not need to have a meal. And Jesus had earlier eaten fish in their presence in the house, recorded by Luke in Luke 24. And some writers regard the inclusion of this scene in John's Gospel as a further proof of the bodily resurrection of Jesus. William Barclay, who was quoting Ignatius, a bishop of Samaria a very, very long time ago, quoted the following words. And I think Ignatius was writing either in the 1st or 2nd century, very, very close to the time of Jesus. And he wrote, I know and believe that he was in the flesh even after the resurrection. And when he came to Peter and his company, he said to them, Take, handle me, and see that I am not a bodiless demon. And they believed, for they were firmly convinced of his flesh and blood. There on the beach, Jesus took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same thing with the fish. Actions reminiscent of those he performed at the Last Supper, and again with the travellers at Emmaus when they arrived there. I see strong symbolism of these things. They just show how Jesus was the servant of all, ready to serve. I see this very clearly. Then we come to Peter's restoration. After eating and while they were sitting around the fire, Jesus turns to Simon Peter and asks him, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? I wonder, does Peter love him more than the other disciples that were there with him? Or does he mean, does Peter love them more than the other disciples loved Jesus? And it doesn't matter. The question is, do you love me? And that was really what Jesus was asking. Do you love me? It's the way that Simon answered that mattered. Interesting to note that Jesus addressed him by his own name, not Peter, that is Petros, the rock, the name that he was given when, as Neil pointed out, a long time before, Peter had recognised that Jesus was the Messiah, and he was given the name Peter then. He was Simon at that point, and Jesus named him Peter. You'll be the rock on which my church will be built. Petros, if you like. I've been nicknamed that a few times. The name given at his confession of Jesus as Christ. Peter called him Simon, son of John, because Jesus called him Simon, son of John, because he'd lost the credit of his strength and stability, which the name signified. Those denials in the garden outside the high priest's house destroyed Peter's strength and stability and trust. If I imagine myself in Peter's shoes at this time, I'd be shifting in my seat. Peter being asked that question, do you love me more than these? Because Peter would be very aware that he failed his Lord at a crucial time. And this was made worse by the fact that earlier he'd bravely boasted that he would never forsake him. He said, even if all of the others fall away, I will never forsake you. But he did. That reveals Simon Peter in his true humanity. It's very easy to say things. It's very, very hard to live them. Jesus didn't ask, do you respect me? Or do you honour me? No, he asked, do you love me? In a way, he was asking, how much do you love me? And he asked it 3 times, probably knowing that it would hurt Simon to be asked so many times. Simon Peter's failure had to be dealt with. He had denied Jesus 3 times, and it took 3 times the question, "Do you love me?" to cleanse the sin of denial from Simon Peter's conscience. Each time after Simon's reply, Jesus instructed him to take care of and feed his sheep. Now you'll notice that I've been alternating between calling him Simon and Peter. He is both. He is Simon, son of John, called Peter upon his confession of Christ as the Messiah. And so we can alternatively call him Simon, son of John, or we can call him Peter the Rock. And I've alternated between using the 2 terms, depending on what I wanted to say. Jesus instructed him to take care of and to feed his sheep. Clearly, the sheep Jesus is referring to are the people that they will come into contact with, the other disciples and everybody else that they will deal with as they move through their time of apostleship in the later years. In what is now a very old commentary on this passage by Dr. Matthew Henry, it says, "Before Christ would commit his sheep to Simon Peter's care, he asked him, 'Do you love me?' Christ has such a tender regard to his flock that he will not trust it with any but those that love him." And I think I need to read that again so that you really listen carefully to the words. Christ has such tender regard to his flock that he will not trust it with any but those who love him, and therefore will love all that are for his sake. Those that do not truly love Christ will never truly love the souls of men, or will naturally care for their state as they should. Nor will that minister love his work that does not love his master. To me, these words are directly to the point. Any one of us who would care for others in a pastoral sense will only be able to do it out of a love for the Lord. To reach out to those who we would seek to win for Jesus requires love for him to be visible in our own lives. Nothing else is good enough. I don't think I need to say anything more. I think that says the whole thing. Amen. Now we're going to sing Freely, Freely, I think.